Hello friends, welcome to the M.A.R.E podcast. Before we get started, you can find our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts and YouTube. Don't forget that you can find more about the M.A.R.E project at www.marehamburg.com, and you can support the project and this podcast through Patreon. All the links are in the description. Enjoy! Hello friends, welcome to another episode of the M.A.R.E podcast. It is a pleasure to have you all here again with me this evening, as I have Megan Crutcher. Is it Crutcher? Am I pronouncing this correctly? Okay,
exactly.
Crutcher with me.
Crutch.
Crutch, like Crutcher. Megan
Crutch with an ER.
Yes. And the podcast this evening. Welcome to the podcast. It's very nice to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So you now in where are you? In East Africa?
I'm in East Africa. I'm in Zanzibar currently working on a field project.
Excellent. And then after the end of June, you'll be in Liberia in West Africa.
Yes.
So you're going across. Excellent.
Exactly.
But, okay, I'm going to stop talking now. And can you please give us a bit of like an introduction of who you are, where you're from, and what you're doing?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a public historian and a maritime archaeologist. And my specialty in terms of research is West Africa and maritime archaeology, but specifically the history and archaeology of Liberia, West Africa, where I primarily work in a small rural town on the southeastern coast of Liberia. And I also do terrestrial archaeology, historical research, public history, and all of that. I got my PhD from Texas A&M University in the nautical archaeology program there in 2025. I have a master's in public history from Duquesne University, which is in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and I would give a big shout out to Duquesne as well. And I also have a bachelor's degree in history. So I came to my PhD wanting to look at heritage and memory and conservation, and heritage preservation. And I sort of got sidetracked along the way, and I started working in Liberia. I've been working there since early 2023 in terms of fieldwork, but I've been working in archives and other materials since 2020. I am currently in between my two postgraduate positions. I graduated from my PhD and I immediately started a postdoc at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, where I've been teaching for the last year. And I am starting next month as an assistant professor of history at the University of West Florida, where I'll be moving starting in the fall 2026 semester. So I'm super happy to be here and get to talk a little bit about maritime archaeology, maybe even bridging the gap between maritime and terrestrial stuff through what I've been doing in Liberia, and also to give one of my favorite countries on the planet a little shout out. I love Liberia, I love working there, and I love the team I get to work with, so I'm super excited to get to talk about it.
Lovely. Oh, you will talk about it. So, first of all, congratulations on your new position that you're starting for. I hope it goes well.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I'm sure the people at the University of West Florida will be lucky to have you. But let's get started on like the topics that I like to talk about. So, how did you get into maritime archaeology then? How did you get into maritime stuff? And was it what happened?
That is a great question. So, I think there are two factors that kind of contributed to this. The first being that I chose to go to Texas A&M's nautical archaeology program, which has the word nautical in it, and it's very maritime and nautical focused. So the fact that my PhD was geared towards that kind of means that even if I hadn't liked it, I would have gone into it. But I also had the added benefit of really enjoying the maritime more broadly. I was a swimmer all throughout basically my entire life. I swam in high school competitively, and then I went to my undergrad institution specifically to swim. So I competed in my undergrad in swimming, I actually went to the Division III national championships for the U.S. Division III collegiate athletics and swimming, which your European audience might not be as well versed in American college athletics, but American college athletics are quite a big thing for student athletes. Um, so I was always really into water and swimming. I grew up going to the beach all the time. I was really into the sea. Um, but I had never really connected that to like my career and what I wanted to do until I went to the nautical archaeology program. And once I was there, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. Like, I really took the perspective of the fact that water connects all of us throughout human history. And in terms of transportation and trade and connection between people, like, water has been such an important conduit of that. So that kind of mentality really inspired the research I wanted to do. But also my experiences with water and with being part of like these water bodies, like seas and rivers and lakes and pools and all of this, like I got a different appreciation for what water means to people who like are in it and with it all the time. And I think I definitely bring that to my work as an archaeologist.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. So you obviously discovered this newly found like love about the water and how impressive it is that connects everyone, and then you try to bridge it together with Liberia and the area of the world you're working on. So I was wondering if you could maybe explain to us how these two places connect, because I'm not sure if audience are familiar of like, where Liberia is or what it's known for. I'm from my side, I believe it's one of the places that were not colonized, right? They had their own kind of
Mm-hmm.
economy because they had a very strong maritime tradition. I may be completely wrong, but this is like on the top of my head. So maybe how do the two connect?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Liberia was never colonized by Europe during the scramble for Africa in the 1880s and 90s. Liberia was independent. Liberia was actually independent earlier than this. It's known as the First Black Republic. It was founded in 1822 by a group of free African Americans and Afro Caribbeans who had come from the Americas seeking a haven from slavery and racism and the violence of the growing Jim Crow system in the southern U.S. And so they decided that the best way to do this would be to go back to Africa and to establish this, in some times, a haven for freedom, in other times, a semi-colony of the U.S., in other times, a really new and interesting way to explore liberation and nation building and what it meant to be free. So they established Liberia in 1822, but it was mostly run by white agents of what's called the American Colonization Society, or ACS. And the ACS was the organization that sponsored free people to go to Liberia. So they had chapters in most states where they would raise funds to send people back to Africa. They were pretty vocal when it came to like missionary efforts in West Africa, especially Liberia. And the ACS itself was a really interesting organization. It was a really kind of difficult marriage between competing interests. On the one hand, the ACS leaders were a lot of white Southern slaveholders, but also abolitionists, Quakers, free Black intellectuals who had this vision to create this safe haven, competing with the interests of slavery in the southern U.S. So the story of Liberia is a really interesting one because it's very much an African story, it's very much an American story, and it's very much an African American and Afro-Caribbean story as well, in how people navigated some of these conversations and interests around their freedom. So they founded Liberia in 1822. And then they were governed by these white, or I say governed, this is kind of a loosely governed term. They were kind of governed by these white um agents of the ACS until they declared independence. They declared independence from the US and the ACS in 1847. And Liberia said, like, we're gonna figure it out on our own now. We don't want you to tell us what to do anymore. So they declared independence in 1847. The United States did not recognize their independence until 1862, when they were basically forced to during the Civil War. So that's another conversation entirely. But the national context of Liberia is really interesting, and their history is really interesting when it comes to like the intersections between continents and worlds across the Atlantic. And there's some really great historical work out there about Liberia, but really not a ton of archaeological, especially maritime archaeological. Um, there's another archaeology project in Liberia that's really excellent. They've been working since 2017, looking at Liberian nationhood and the settlers and sort of like Black placemaking in Liberia. And they're doing really cool stuff. They're called the Back to Africa Heritage and Archaeology Project. But aside from that project, really there hasn't been a concerted archaeological program in Liberia. Part of this is due to the fact that the other thing Liberia is historically known for is that they went through a brutal and bloody 14-year civil war from 1989 to 2003, which resulted in mass civilian casualties, destruction of all vital infrastructure, huge unrest, and a UN peacekeeping mission being brought to the country. So really this recent history of civil conflict has had a really big impact on Liberia as a country, and on sort of the way that people view the past and the way that Liberia is moving forward as a country in the present. So, I mean, it makes sense that during the growth of archaeology programs in American academia in the 60s and 70s, right when Liberia was getting into this conflict, those programs were coming up in the 60s and 70s in America, and they never really had the chance to send students to do things or, have these projects and programs like a lot of other countries have had. So archaeology is still very young in Liberia, and my project is really, really fortunate to be supported by a number of Liberians. My project is called the Cru Coast Heritage Initiative, and it's co-directed by Prince Conde, who's Liberian. And we also have other community partners and researchers who work alongside us who are from Liberia. So we're really happy to be able to contribute to the sort of growth and rebirth of archaeology in Liberia, especially from like a maritime perspective. And I can continue talking about like the maritime perspective if you want, or if you have other questions for me that you want to get through, we can also do that.
I imagine the project you're doing, it has to do with the maritime perspective and the maritime heritage of Liberia. So I think my natural next question would be like, okay, what is this project about? So I think if the two are combined, then yes, I want to know the maritime aspect of it and like how does a project, maybe start with what you do for the project, what kind of information or field work are you doing? And then maybe if this is connected to the overall maritime landscape of Liberia, then that would be great.
Yeah. So our project, the Cru Coast Heritage Initiative, started during my PhD. It's what my dissertation was written about. If you've seen some of my articles, we've done a few articles with information from that project. But basically, we're looking at 3 lines of data. We're looking at historical archival sources. We're looking at oral historical sources, and we're looking at archaeology. So a bulk of our earliest work, at least my early work, was archival in nature, primarily archival in nature, very historical in nature. We then transitioned to, once I went over to Liberia and Prince and I established our project, we transitioned to doing oral history interviews, specifically with elders, but also with a lot of old men who are subsistence farmers who also do fishing and canoeing and things like that, really looking at how they view the maritime heritage of their community. So our project is called the Cru Coast Heritage Initiative, and it's called that Cru KRU because we work primarily with an indigenous group called the Cru KRU. They're quite famous historically in archives for boarding British ships and enlisting as sailors. They worked on American ships. They worked on steamer lines, like German and British steamer lines in the Atlantic. And they really made up a large part of the maritime labor force of European companies in the 19th century and into the 20th century. They were, porters, stevedores, sailors, um, and they were on all of these European ships. It was really common for them to be on these European ships, and this was very much like an ethnic kind of occupation where people who were crew took on these maritime labor roles and they took on these maritime jobs. But they also, at home in Liberia, not aboard these European ships, at home in Liberia, they very much have a strong connection to this maritime dimension. So things like fishing and canoeing, trade brokerage along the coast in canoes, trade brokerage downstream rivers. All of this stuff is very much connected to the crew as an indigenous group. And so we primarily work with crew communities, descendant communities in the southeast of Liberia, which is where the Cru Coast is located. So our oral history interviews with elders mostly consisted of, talking to people who have this kind of connection and seeking to understand how they understand the maritime now and how they understand their sort of ancestors' historical maritime labor, if it's something that's even important to them, was one of our questions. And it very much still is something that's part of their heritage and memory. So we started looking at that, especially through oral history. And then once we had gotten a couple of really nice grants from the Society for Post-Medieval Archaeology, shout out, and also the Institute for Nautical Archaeology. Both of them supported our archaeological research in Liberia, where we were actually able to excavate in an indigenous crew town called Setra Crew. So since late 2023, we've been excavating at Setra Crew, Liberia, which is a very small town in the southeastern region. We do terrestrial excavation. We don't excavate underwater. We don't dive in Liberia. We're not looking for shipwrecks. We're not looking for canoe wrecks either. But we are looking for things like trade goods or incorporation of maritime themes into sort of coastal life. A really good example that comes up is that a lot of the materials we've excavated on land in Liberia have been locally made pottery. So a lot of the locally made pottery is decorated with an imprinted design that's made by wrapping a fishing net around the pot when it's still wet and then firing it with that fishing net imprint on it. So a lot of the wares that we have are decorated like that. Some of them are decorated with scrapes and incisions and punctate things that are clearly made with marine animals, like a shell, for example. So even in a very terrestrial archaeological context, you still have this really ubiquitous incorporation of these maritime things. which fits with what we expect, right? Like people who are living near the coast who are using marine resources are doing this kind of thing all the time. But what's really cool about the crew is that you also have these European documents and this really interesting maritime wage labor that they get involved with at sea, that kind of makes their story a really interesting one. So we've been working to try and understand some of the heritage and memory around this. We are honestly probably doing too much when it comes to arms of research, but um, I love it. Not to speak for Prince Conde, but I think he also enjoys it, and we have a really good time with our team in Liberia. Um, the project that we're currently working on, which was also funded by INA, the Institute of Nautical Archaeology, we are working right now on documenting the construction process for vernacular watercraft in the southeast of Liberia. So we're specifically looking at these crew dugout canoes that are in use today and how they're created. Um, Starting from the moment that the builder chooses the tree he wants to cut down in the forest, and all the way to the time the canoe is like launched over the ocean. So we've been documenting this process for the last year. Um, Prince had the opportunity to go into the tree cutting and carving forest with the builders a couple of months ago and do a lot of documentation of this process. And I'm really hopeful that this will be super beneficial for quite a range of research questions. Like, we're interested in knowing, like, what are the social networks and negotiations and sort of like cultural dimensions of this process? Like, how do people relate to each other? How does this work get done from forest to ocean? But I also imagine that this can tell us a lot when we start looking at how canoes are constructed. It can tell us a lot about the design intentions and process, which is not often found from my vantage point in the literature on dugouts. Like, you see a lot of sources that are kind of incredulous about their ocean going abilities, like, oh, there's no way they could cross like a rough sea in this kind of vessel. And I think that we might be able to speak to some of those conversations by saying, like, look how seaworthy these are, like, or builders choose different wood for different purposes and different bodies of water, different paddle shapes for different bodies of water. So I'm hopeful that we'll be able to contribute to that sort of like nautical technology and shipbuilding and design conversation as well with this project. Um,
Yeah.
it's also been really cool to see like how it intersects with things like climate and policy, because like climate change is a huge issue when it comes to deforestation and logging, as well as fishing and fisheries. So I'm hopeful that we'll also be able to use the data to speak to some of those impacts as well, because those are very like real everyday experiences that a lot of crew and other fishermen in Liberia experience, is like less catch during certain times of the year when a couple years ago they used to get way more, and like that's how they're feeding their families, and that's how they're taking care of themselves, that's how they're eating. And so when you get less catch because of climate change and other impacts, it really affects other dimensions of your life. So I'm hopeful that this canoe project is kind of a way or a lens through which to view some of those things as well. But um, it's been really cool. It's been really cool to watch. I'll say the most unique thing, we haven't published this yet, so I can't like talk about a lot of the data yet, but
No,
the coolest thing,
yeah.
the most unique thing that I think is just like super fascinating, and since I'm talking to a bunch of fellow like boat nerds, like I think that we can all be boat nerds about this. You typically hear, or at least I was always taught, that when a dugout's constructed, normally you hollow it out with an adze, ADZE, an adze, right? So you're basically like hoeing out the wood with an adze. What they do for these canoes in Liberia, and this is standard, this is agreed upon. It's not that the guy that we watched is like unique or something. Like, this is standard. They hollow it with an axe.
Okay.
Like literally like basically using the axe like a chisel. They hollow it with an axe. So they cut out these like big hunks of it and then they like hollow it with an axe. And it's really quite fascinating. And I think that also tells us a little bit about like how these canoes are constructed and what we can say about maybe people in the past. The goal of this project isn't to look into the past, it's more present focused, but I think it's just so fascinating that that
Yeah.
kind of contradiction from what we typically think of when we think of how you hollow a dugout.
No.
So
So,
I'm super excited about this and I think it
no.
should be really
Wow. It does sound excited, but okay. So if I take a step back and talk about like you mentioned how many arms you have in this research and how many different things you're doing at once, and I wanted to double down on that because looking at your publication list, I would say that there's a bit of everything in there, from climate change to cultural landscapes to there's even though I saw the paper last year about like rationalization of maritime professions. Uh, so it's a there's also a paper about tattoos there, which is sounds supremely interesting. So you
yeah.
go from political, economic to cultural to tattoos to identity to maritime landscape to theory. So it's exciting to see someone covering so many topics. I'm not going to get into the details of everything because I'm sure people can go and look at the papers and read them and they'll be very interested in them. But what I wanted to kind of like ask as a like maybe a closing question for this is, so you how do people, locals, react to your work on their recent history? And I'm not saying this as a question of, oh, are you colonializing their history? No, I'm talking about how are people engaging with it, or is it just the people that the 5% of the population who are interested in it, and the rest of them are kind of neutral towards it? Like how it's the reception of the people towards the work you're doing in Liberia?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I'm gonna like go from like a high level to a smaller level. I think that when we often in archaeology talk about community engagement, it's like very surface level. It's like, oh, well, we're talking to people in the community, but it's not community directed. Research questions are not created by the community. They don't have a stake in the research. Um, the main researcher, like me in this case, could like disappear and it would have no impact on their life whatsoever. Like it's just very distant from the local community. And I think that there's a range of historical and archaeological projects that do different solutions to this problem. Like there's really interesting solutions in contexts that have a really good digital access, for example, like digital heritage stuff is like super big. That doesn't work in Liberia because most of the people that we are working with live in a rural area. They don't have smartphones. They don't have good cell service or access to data or the financial capability to always have data in their phone. And even if they did, because of the network connection, like websites that have a ton of pictures and things take a long time to load. So the kinds of digital community stuff that a lot of people think of doing don't work in a lot of these contexts. Um, yes, yes, okay, cool. Yeah, so a lot of these digital methods don't work in this kind of context. But what I will say is that like when I say my project is co-directed by Prince Condé, like it really is co-directed by Prince Condé, who is a member of this community. He's crew. He grew up with this. We also work, one of our affiliated researchers is a former fisher. He fished to put himself through high school. And he's also crew and Liberian. And then we have a student intern who's crew named Cynthia. And we're really, really integrated and invested in the local community um, to a degree that, like, I think is super important for this kind of research. Like, the research questions that we have are completely developed by the elders that we have interviewed and worked with. So when we were interviewing them for oral history interviews, we actually met them before the interviews took place and asked them, what do they want to talk about? Like, what do they want preserved for posterity when it comes to like maritime stuff or to their own personal histories or their memories or whatever. We asked them. They developed research questions. The community that we work in, the place we excavate, we're very much integrated in that community when we're excavating. There are some local students who will come and hang out with us when we're excavating. And then every day, because Prince used to teach, so he every day will go into the school in the local community and will have like, he'll teach the history class basically, or we'll have kind of a workshop with the students. Something else that we've been doing with community members is we've been having workshops with local high school students to get them interested in history and heritage more broadly and to sort of inspire them and give them training and tools to understand that this is actually important to them and that like, and it is important to them, otherwise they wouldn't come to the workshop. So like they're very much invested. And we've had these workshops with at least 75 high school students by now across two counties in Liberia, which has been really cool. And I think what I'll say too, like from my own positionality as well, is like because I work with such a team that I trust and respect and admire and have been working with for so long, that a lot of the time I don't control these activities and interactions and things. Like I leave it to them and I defer to them and to their authority and respect in the community to figure out like what their priorities are, what they want to see out of this. Because there's so much research out there that's just very like extractive and doesn't involve the community, and I don't want to be a part of that at all. And I also like I care very deeply for the people that I work with. And I have built like friendships and personal relationships with the people that I work with in Liberia that are like far more than just a research partnership where we work during the field season. Like we'll call each other on WhatsApp like every day, various people and I, and we're always kind of connected. So I think that kind of closeness to communities and sort of the tenacity of being willing to stick with it and to stand by them even when it's difficult for you as a researcher, like and I'll explain what I mean by that. What I mean is like it's hard to get grants. Like anyone listening to this podcast will know, like it's hard to get grants for research. It's difficult. Even if you have like the best idea and the best project in the world, it is hard to get grants. And my project is no different. I applied for like 45 grants the last 2 years of my PhD to do my research. And I was only able to do it because I had some funding from my university and also from post-medieval archaeology and from the INA. So like that is the funding that I got. You know, I applied for all these big things and I applied for all this stuff, didn't get any of it. Hopefully not because they thought that my work was crappy, but yeah, like grants are super hard and a lot of people are forced to give up on their research project because they don't have funding. And for me, and I'm not like saying that they're wrong or they're bad or whatever, but for me, it was more important to me to show the communities I work with that I care about keeping my promises and coming back, regardless of how much money I have to do that. And because of a lot of the relationships I've built, I can go and have a visit. Even if we don't have a massive excavation, I can go and have a visit for much less budget. And so I've committed to myself, like, especially as I graduated and got a better salary after graduating, you know, like I'm going to use, if I have to, and I have to put the project on hold for grants, I'm still going to go. Thankfully, that hasn't happened. We got a little grant again from INA. We got funding last year, so that hasn't happened yet. But I have made that commitment to myself that even if I don't get a grant to continue the project, I'm still going to go. And I'm going to use my own resources to do that because to me, those connections are irreplaceable. A research paper is replaceable. I can write another one. I can go to another archive. I can switch angles. I can look at old data in a new way, but I can't replace relationships that are important to me and that took a lot of time and trust to build. So that's kind of the way I've approached things. And I know that's really long-winded. And I don't take a lot of pauses, so maybe it's hard for you to edit it down. But that's kind of my approach is to always defer to the people who actually know this better than me, because I might know the literature, but I don't know their lived experience. And their lived experience is a really important part of this. And I want to be able to do justice to what they're telling me and sharing with me.
Yeah. No, I think the what you said is the most important of all. It's like you care about them and you care about what they're doing and what they're saying and all that. So I don't think I think that you said it. I shouldn't add anything else to it because you said it beautifully. That caring about the community and caring about those people is all that matters, and caring about their natural heritage will move on. And as you said, like papers and academia is all replaceable, but the connections are not. So with that, I want to thank everyone for listening to another episode of the M.A.R.E podcast. I want to thank you, Megan, for being here with me and for sharing. And I hope that it all goes very well for you in the future and that you don't need to fund your excavation and your field work yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It is a pleasure. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and I'll see you all in 2 weeks. Bye.